Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball. Welcome to episode 12, and as you know, the season's now more than a quarter of the way through. We kind of wanted to take a break from looking at the historical side of baseball and kind of talk about some more current baseball guys, because while there are some guys in the major leagues that are in the twilight of their career, and they're coming down to their final seasons and will ultimately be a Hall of Fame inductee as soon as their, waiting period is up, essentially. There are a lot of guys, actually, that if you look, that you'd be surprised that they've put up essentially Hall of Fame numbers over their career, and you could see a pretty sizable expansion to the Hall of Fame roster coming up here.
When I was thinking about Hall of Famers playing right now, I think that there would be not that many of them playing at any one time. But if you look back, there's more people playing at any one time that actually end up in the Hall of Fame in any given year. And there are a lot of players playing right now who could be in the Hall of Fame, but we've identified, I think, 9 of them as what we'd call slam dunks.
Yeah, there's like 9 guys, and I think looking at the list, you probably would say, yeah, all of these guys are going to be Hall of Famers one day. I don't think all of them are certainly first ballot ones, but
right.
There's actually a good number of them that probably are.
Pretty close.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going through the list, you got to start with like a guy that's like done something that pretty much guarantees you get into the Hall of Fame, just because I can't imagine that there's a guy that has won the Triple Crown and not made it to the Hall of Fame.
That's to my knowledge, there has been nobody who's won the Triple Crown.
But Miguel Cabrera obviously has won a Triple Crown. He's, 315 career hitter with like over 480 home runs.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, and we like that consistency, career WAR of 69. Anytime you got a number with a 6 in front of it as a position player, and you play, anything less than 20 years, that's a big number.
Yeah, you're putting up some impressive, and especially because he had some years in there where he didn't play particularly much.
So, another guy who I think is absolutely a first ballot Hall of Famer, and he's got a career WAR of 100. 100.
Yeah,
I'll say it again: 100 career WAR in
that's
19 seasons.
That's when you get above 100. That's when you start. You're not just a Hall of Famer. You're talked about in that echelon of guys like Bonds, like
absolutely
undeniable. More than a generational player, almost.
If you had 659 career home runs, you batted 299 for your career, a career on base plus slugging of 147. You would think,
and even won some Gold Gloves in there.
Yes, and made himself into a fielder. And of course, we're talking about Albert Pujols.
And he's the kind of guy where that WAR number actually gets more impressive if you just had stopped playing when you got to the Angels, basically.
That's a great point, because I think if you really haven't been a baseball fan for a really long time, you might have missed when Pujols was just unbelievable when he played with the Cardinals before he went to the American League and signed that big contract.
And even then, just those years on the Cardinals, I don't think anybody's ever had a better start to their first 10 seasons than Albert Pujols, except maybe another guy that's on this list.
yeah, and he is eligible right now for the Hall of Fame with this season, given the 20 games or so, not even yet 20 games that they've played, with a 73 career WAR in 9 years.
Which is just bonkers.
Averaging an 8 WAR a season. How about that? That's Barry Bonds right there.
I mean, that's just nutty numbers.
And his career stats, already are getting to the aggregate numbers, right? And we can get into this a little bit. I think it's worthwhile doing.
Yeah, because I think the aggregate numbers is going to be something that has to changes over time.
Right. So, we used to say 500 home runs or 400 home runs was a slam dunk into the Hall of Fame. We of course we know guys that have 600 home runs that are not in the Hall of Fame. So no longer is that an automatic ticket.
No, that I think
3,000 hits would get you in the Hall of Fame. I think it still might, because there certainly are no guys that got 3,000 hits that aren't in the Hall of Fame.
3,000 hits, I feel like, is just a little different, because it's harder to get 3,000 hits and not be an effective player, whereas you could be a guy that hits a lot of home runs in your career, but you really weren't that effective of a player.
So the player we're talking about, of course, is Mike Trout, who, in addition to, hitting home runs and hitting for average and playing Gold Glove quality center field, also has 170 stolen bases.
Yeah, he steals a ton he does everything. That's the thing, is that he's one of those true actual 5-tool guys.
So he's the kind of guy that we'd say if he didn't play another game,
he probably gets it.
Would he be a Hall of Famer? That's hard when you only play because you don't have the aggregate stats like we were saying in terms of totals for your home runs and RBIs and whatnot. So, and another guy who doesn't have career stats that would necessarily knock your socks off when you talk about career WAR, 40.1 career WAR.
But the position, I think, is relevant.
As a catcher, that is true. 16 years as a catcher is something to celebrate in the major leagues.
You don't
last
need
that long.
Exactly. And to be as effective as he's been for that period of time.
281 career batting average for a catcher. Okay,
but that's not what he's had some big hits. He's broken our hearts a few times.
Yes.
But he is. Yadier Molina, who is of course the catcher we're talking about, is one of the best defensive catchers there's ever been.
9 Gold Gloves. Okay. That at catcher, that just
that basically means for a decade this guy was the best fielding catcher in the National League.
And I also found that he has 66 career steals. And the old joke about he runs well for a catcher. Well, you know what? He runs well for a catcher.
And what I think is also interesting is that there's actually like a handful of pitchers that are Hall of Fame locks, essentially.
Yeah.
I think 2 guys for sure. I know you really like the third guy. I think his career numbers are really impressive, and he's kind of done it in a very mercenary way.
Yeah.
So to talk
you
about,
don't like him, I know you're not a big. I should say you don't like his mercenary nature. I think.
Yeah, I think
Zach Greinke.
Yeah, and I think the other 2 guys are obviously Clayton Kershaw. Actually, 3. There's Clayton Kershaw, Scherzer, and Verlander.
Yeah.
All of those guys.
Right. And I think when you break down the stats, so let's start with Greinke, right? So, and pitcher WAR, we've talked about it along. Some of the pitcher WARs were really low, actually. Not for these guys, though, however.
And I think what's interesting is that, despite bouncing and playing for like not a lot of great teams,
not
because
all the time, yeah.
he got traded a lot, he still managed to have a career whip of like 1.15 and have over 200 wins. And
right.
I think wins are still something. While you can get them in a single season, I think they can not necessarily be representative of how good you were, because the team could have just hit really well in your starts that season.
And those Royal teams, as I recall, he pitched for, were not very good teams.
No.
And it was hard to get wins for those guys.
But that's not going to happen over career. You're not going to like luck your way into 200 wins.
Absolutely. And he, of those 4, right, you're talking about, the other 3 you consider are slam dunks.
I think the other 3 are slam dunks. And I think, and that's not even necessarily Greinke's fault. I think that's just necessarily the way baseball fans and writers think, because people are romantic that way, and they like a guy that stuck with his team over a guy that just went whoever was paying him the most money, or he was traded to.
He's got enough. And, so Verlander is a guy who's got, that impressed me, the 3,000 strikeouts.
Yeah, especially because that's not something a lot of people. That's one of the things not a lot of people do that.
Right. That's I know that's sort of a cumulative stat, but still, you got to put up every year. And people are pitching less innings now than they used to when they would get 3,000 strikeouts. So it's that much harder to get it, and that's because the strikeouts per 9 inning ratio.
And it's not like he's
up.
done that in that many seasons. It's not like he's had some kind of endless career to compile strikeouts.
So Verlander, with a 71 career WAR, 226 wins, a career WHIP of 1.13, those are just all Hall of Fame stats.
I mean, it's like the same thing with Kershaw. There's virtually in terms of Kershaw, what's more impressive is the career ERA of 2.45 and the WHIP of 1.
1.
That's just to do that as a starting pitcher. You're happy if your elite reliever can put that up for a season. You get a career of that.
And another guy who has 2,476 Ks and 2,284 innings, so more than a strikeout per inning for his career.
And I think Scherzer, he's probably the one who has the smallest resume of work, just because he's pitched only 13 seasons, which is the lowest at. Actually, no.
Yeah.
Kershaw's pitched only 12.
Yeah, they're right there.
So, still, he's got 60 and 13, 2,700 strikeouts.
Career whip of 1.09. I mean, that's a Hall of Famer.
That's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
I think so. It's like when you look at those 9 guys, you've got Hall of Famers. I think once you move away from those guys, it starts getting a little harder. And now you've got guys that either need to put up a few more really good seasons, or even you just don't know.
So, we talked about Yadier being in there because of his 9 Gold Gloves and his leadership, right? The great, playoff performer. And I'd put Buster Posey has that same sort of pedigree as a playoff performer. Certainly the Giants having won World Series while he was catching. Mm-hmm. Doesn't quite have the defense. He has 1 Gold Glove. It must have been the year Yadier got hurt or something, because, Yadier won 9 of them. But he has it. He's got his 4 Silver Sluggers, does Buster Posey.
An MVP.
MVP,
year.
and his career WAR of 41 in 10 seasons only, 41.8, averaging 4 a year. And again, at the catcher position,
but he's not been a catcher as much recently. I think he's played a lot of first base.
He has played outside of the catcher position, but he's still a primary catcher.
He's still a primary catcher, but it's only been 10 seasons.
Yeah,
and he hasn't put up the kind of, and he hasn't been that kind of otherworldly performer like Yadier has been, at least defensively.
So we have another category called needs to do more, but you're suggesting that maybe Buster Posey is still in that needs to do a little more.
I think he's above that a little bit, needs to do more, like are guys that just like, they just really haven't played long enough and amassed enough yet, whereas Posey, theoretically is already kind of on the bubble.
We go back and forth on this next guy. For some reason, I just don't love this player. When I looked at his statistics, and maybe I should read them first, and you'll not have the bias that I did just listening to his name. So career WAR 46 plus in 13 seasons. Okay, so that's averaging 3 and change per season. That's good. 344 career home runs. All right, that's not spectacular, but that's good. 298 career average. Okay, with the home runs, that's good. 1,100 RBIs, 5 silver sluggers, career ops at 135. Wow, that's pretty good. And that's Ryan Braun.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think of him as a guy that has those kinds of career statistics.
Ryan Braun's not a Hall of Famer, is he?
Or that he's played 13 seasons.
Yeah, but when you look at the stats and you see that now, also maybe, at that position that he played some third and now he's in the outfield, maybe he needs a few more years of getting over 400 home runs and keeping the average near 300, and maybe the rally for Scott Rowland, we think that's going to eventually get him
I think
in the
especially
same thing.
And something Rowland has over him certainly
The
is
fielding,
the defense.
yeah.
So I think that for Ryan Braun, is the issue for him is that I think just being a guy that hit 300 home runs and was a really good hitter. I'm not trying to take away anything from Ryan Braun, but if you're going to say, hit less than 400 home runs and be a 300 hitter, I don't think that just makes you a Hall of Famer anymore.
So it's a good segue into the next guy. He also is a third baseman, still playing, obviously. Career WAR 56 in 12 years. And that's pretty impressive. That's more than 4 a season. So it raises my eyebrows a little bit when I see that. And he's got almost 300 career home runs at the third base position. 3 Gold Gloves. That's impressive. The 267 career average for Evan Longoria, that holds him back a little bit.
And I think especially when you have less than 300 home runs, if you're going to hit 267, he needs to be at like 450. If he wants to be a Hall of Famer.
He's not going to get there.
And he is not going to get there.
He's not going to get there, Evan Longoria. So I would have never put Evan Longoria on my, I think he's a Hall of Famer list. But statistically, in terms of the way you measure things, he's a guy that gets into the conversation. That's all we're saying. Now, you brought this guy up, so I put him on the list here and because he's had some really good recent seasons. But over 10 seasons, J.D. Martinez only has a career WAR of 24. But he's had 231 home runs in those 10 years, 137 ops plus. So he just needs to do this for
I think he's definitely the kind of guy that's in a need to do more.
5 or 6 years.
Whereas he's just not there yet.
Yeah,
I think and I think there are some other guys.
And as a DH, by the way, I would say that makes it more difficult for him in my eyes.
Hard.
Yeah.
Makes it really hard. I think there are some guys though that are in this category that kind of do belong there. Like I'll go to bat for one of the guys I really like, and Joey Votto.
Yeah, I like this player.
I mean, who doesn't like? If you're a baseball fan, you like Joey Votto.
So, 12 years, career WAR of 62. Joey Votto has been one of the best fielding first basemen in the National League for years.
Doesn't strike out.
Great OBA.
Great on base. Great pretty much every aspect of his game. He's the kind of guy, I think, especially because he's done it all right. And you almost are happy for him and the Reds that they are good this season because he has been on that team and they have not been good at all.
And his career WAR of 62 is the highest of all the guys, on an average as well, having an average of over 5 a season. And yet I still feel like it would be really good for Joey Votto if he were to
another 2-3 seasons.
Yeah.
Then he goes to he should be in there to he's a slam dunk.
Yeah.
I think there's some guys we kind of identify that are at the 10 season mark that or over it, and I just don't think we'll get there. They're good players certainly, but guys like Andrew McCutchen and Lorenzo Cain and Jose Altuve, as good as they've been in especially some of those guys recently, they're just really good baseball
I couldn't
players.
believe that Altuve has played 10 seasons, by the way.
Yeah,
That blew me away a little bit. And, Altuve, boy, he still looks like he's going to be playing at this high level. 5 Silver Sluggers, a Gold Glove, an MVP, 313 career batting average at the second base position.
I think of those guys,
Yep.
he has the best
Yep.
one of separating himself also because of the position he plays. As an outfielder, I just don't think the McCutchen and Kane will get there with the stats they need. Not now.
No.
And I think at least for batters, that's what you're going to see with the shift. I think in how we judge the Hall of Fame. I just don't think you're going to see the same types of compiling statistics just kind of get you in there because, well, you got that many, so therefore you're kind of a Hall of Famer now.
I know when we talked about Lou Whitaker, right, in the first show, and saying that he's a guy that should be in the Hall of Fame, and he had, the home runs at the second base position, and he had hit for power at a time where that position wasn't a power position, so it made him look even better with some speed and good defense. But aggregate, because he hit over 200 home runs, I'm not sure that hitting 200 home runs at second base anymore is your ticket, going to get you there that much faster.
It just gets you in because you did that. Like a guy like Pedroia could hurt him.
Yeah, well, Pedroia, what an interesting guy, and of course he hasn't played in 2 years, and he's got a career WAR of 51 in 12 years. So again, that's over 4. He has his MVP. Excellent, over 300 career batting average. But if you ask me, is Dustin Pedroia a Hall of Famer right now? Without looking at the stats, I'd say nice player. Mm-hmm. Not a Hall of Famer. And you probably, we didn't cover him in the top one, actually. We neglected him. Another second baseman who plays for our beloved Mets at this point is Robinson Cano.
Yes.
Okay, so let's double
back and talk about a guy that is going to be in the Hall of Fame.
Right, because, Cano already has done enough to be in the Hall of Fame, and you want to get on him for, the steroid, pick up in a test a few years for which he served 80 games. That doesn't mean, that he hasn't had an amazing career at that position again. So he's got his 2 Gold Gloves at second base with 325 homers.
And that's the difference between him and a guy like Lou Whitaker is that Cano wasn't just an elite hitting second baseman. He was an elite hitter.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And the 68 career WAR, I think Lou Whitaker was about a 71, so that's similar.
But in a lot less seasons.
In less seasons. And 5 Silver Sluggers and 7-time All-Star for Cano. If he puts up a few more seasons, I think even the doubters will not be. I mean, I say put up a few more seasons. If he's got 350 homers and he keeps his average, close to that, 300 level, it's, I think going to be too hard to keep him out.
I think what's going to be brutal, though, is that because there's a decent spread in terms of the positions that a lot of the current guys that we think are going to be slam dunks and going to be making it in there are going to get. I think what's going to be brutal is that because there's 3 or 4 really dominant starting pitchers that are probably going to be slam dunk Hall of Famers, that there's this group of guys that are really good starters that I think are going to get excluded just because they're not going to be able to put that many starters in at once.
Well, and that happens in every generation, right, of players, of the guys that he was really good. And that's how you get to be in Almost Cooperstown.
Yeah.
You were really good.
But unfortunately, you played at the same time as Clayton Kershaw, Zach Greinke, and Justin Verlander.
And that's why Buster Posey wins 1 Gold Glove and Yadier Molina wins 9. Maybe Posey was good enough to win 3 or 4, but he played when Yadier did. Sorry.
Exactly. So I think guys like Chris Sale and Madison Bumgarner.
Yeah, so Bumgarner, look at his career. That's a great guy to bring up because we are not talking about the postseason maybe, but we should, because particularly as it pertains to Madison Bumgarner.
I think it helps him. It's something that you could, but at the same time, he's got 119 wins, no Cy Youngs, and 37 career WAR.
I think the WAR and the Cy Youngs, but if I tried to say he's only got this many wins, you'd be jumping all over me going, well, we don't even use wins as an evaluation anymore.
Right, but there isn't anything that I can point to Bumgarner being a Hall of Fame pitcher outside of, well, he was amazing that one postseason.
Well, he had 2 postseasons he was really
2
good
postseasons,
at, right? But one in particular.
One that he was really, really dominant in. And there's just not enough there to say that he should be enshrined in the Hall of Fame of baseball.
So he has 2 Silver Sluggers. I guess Greinke also is like a really good hitter.
Greinke's a really good hitter.
But is there a way Madison Bumgarner gets in the Hall of Fame? What does he have to do now that he is with his new team?
I think if he could put up another couple, I think for a lot of these guys, it would take another couple dominant seasons, at least in this group, because in this group, you've got Madison Bumgarner, Chris Sale, Arrieta, who I don't think has a chance, and Strasburg. Each of them has really only played 10 or 11 seasons. They need to have another 3 or 4 really solid good seasons, I think, if they want to elevate their chances to have at least them stand out from the pack. Because the other problem they're going to have is they're all going to cannibalize one another. Whereas I think like Cole Hamels, who's played 14 seasons. There's kind of 3 other guys. And you've got Hamels, Lester, and Hernandez, who have all played 14 or more seasons. I think of those guys, Hernandez is the only one that I would really, in my mind, I think kind of elevate him outside of that group right now. He was so clearly better than what his stats were suggesting.
That's true. And he had that. He was, he made the, having a 14-12 record, getting the Cy Young possible, right? Guy had, and the 1-loss record that, wasn't very good and still won the Cy Young. And that sort of changed the way voters look at naming Cy Youngs.
He has 2,500 strikeouts and a career whip of 1.2.
I would agree that if I had to look at that list of pitchers and say, okay, between Arrieta, Lester, Hamels, I might put Sale aside for a second, and Strasburg. Those guys, Hernandez is a better pitcher than all of those guys.
Yeah,
Lester, but let's look at Lester as, you talk about aggregate stats. Forget about the WAR, which was 45 in 14 years, 191 and 109 wins, losses. But when you think about Lester, okay, he played for the Red Sox that won the World Series. He's played for good teams, winning teams, and that's how you amass a lot of wins, and he gets a lot of innings out there. So his career whip of 1.26 is good.
Yeah, I think it's just he's a Hall of Very good pitcher.
Yeah.
He's almost made it to Cooperstown.
So Strasburg, on the other hand, I think if you look at his highlight stats, career whip of 1.08, 112 and 58 wins and losses. That's pretty good. Only 10 years. He's only got 1,700
I just don't think it's enough.
It isn't now. That's for sure.
That's for a lot of these guys, and kind of some of the batters we're going to bring up here in a minute, where it's just like they just really haven't had enough time yet. They need more time.
But Strasburg is young enough, right? All these other guys we're talking about are all in their mid-30s. I think Strasburg is close to 31
that's why I think
or
Strasburg and Sale have a chance to elevate themselves, because they still have a couple good seasons probably left where you can expect elite level performance, certainly.
Yeah, Sale has 12 saves, I noticed, and that's interesting only because when he first came in the league, he wasn't, the kind of pitcher he is today, and was a reliever. Obviously not necessarily a closer, but a relief pitcher. And
I think it's interesting because there's 3 closers now, actually, that you bring up closers. There's 3 closers that they could be Hall of Famers.
Yeah, and I think we're going to dispel the notion of aggregating saves, right? So John Franco, former Reds and Mets closer, has over 300 career saves, is not a Hall of Famer, and shouldn't be.
Should not be. No. Franco was a heart attack.
So Fernando Rodney is a current player who's pitched 17 years in the big leagues. He's got 327 career saves. Okay, if I told you the career WAR was 7.4, and even if pitcher WAR doesn't matter, that's ridiculously low. And that guy is not anything but a compiler as far as I'm concerned.
He is not somebody we would ever consider as a Hall of Famer.
But the other 3, I think, and they're still close to their prime, would you say?
I'd say they're still in it, certainly. I mean, you've got Aroldis Chapman.
He of the 100-mile-an-hour fastball.
Kenley Jansen,
also of a 100-mile-an-hour fastball.
And Craig Kimbrell.
Also of the 100-mile-an-hour fastball.
It's a little bit of a theme you got going on there.
How about that?
But, I mean, all of those guys, I think, are certainly the elite closers of this, the elite closers generation. In the post-Mariano era.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best way to frame it.
They're all contemporaries, right? Because Jansen and Kimbrell have 11 years. Chapman, this is season number 10. I think I don't even think he's pitched yet, or maybe he has.
He's also missed seasons due to injury.
But
so
the common theme among all these guys, aside from the saves, right? Chapman has only got 273 because he's played one less season. The other guys have 305 for Jansen and 346 for Kimbrell. Is the whip?
Yeah,
right. 102 for Chapman. And then it goes down.
Yeah, 0.9 for Jansen and 0.96 for Kimbrell.
Okay, that impresses me.
That's
when you're not walking or nobody's getting on base, basically.
So I don't know if all 3 of them will make it in, but I think at least one of them will.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I think 300 saves no longer gets you in.
It's not an auto-qualified.
Yeah.
That's what's dead, I think. You're not going to see guys that get auto-qualified to the Hall of Fame anymore just because ding ding, you hit the right amount of stats. It's just not going to happen.
And having like that sub 1 whip might be something we start saying that is a necessity for a relief pitcher. You got to have something extraordinary about you.
And that's something that's walks and hits per inning pitched, for those maybe if you don't know. If you've got a sub 1 whip, that basically means on average for any inning you go out there, you're not going to allow a base runner.
So that is dominant and over the small amount of innings you pitch in a game, as opposed to, when I look back, I came up with a guy who isn't in the Hall of Fame, didn't make it in our initial, Jim Cott, who pitched for 25 years and he had huge aggregate stats, but the guy pitched a ton of innings and he won a lot of games. And I'm thinking maybe we should value that more highly, that you went out there and took the ball and did that, because in this age of specialization, it doesn't happen.
That's the thing. I think longevity in and of itself isn't a characteristic that makes you a Hall of Fame level player.
Well, it should contribute to it, because the idea that you went out there without your best stuff and you kept pitching in the game because that was the way that the manager managed the game and you played for your team. You had to go out there.
Right, but that doesn't mean you were one of the best. That doesn't mean you were one of the best baseball players.
Well, the fact that you're able to stay in the game even when you didn't have it.
But there's a lot of guys from that same era that did that, but did it a lot better.
Jim Cott, I would throw my hat in and say maybe he's a guy we should reconsider. Anyway, there are other guys that really don't have enough seasons. There's 3 guys we'll kind of come around and talk about. Rendon, who just went to the Angels, only 8th season. Arenado looks great out there in Colorado, 8th season.
Mookie Betts out there in LA now. Again, he's only played 7 seasons. So all 3 of those guys are certainly putting up the numbers that track towards being a Hall of Famer. They just literally aren't eligible yet. And then there are some guys that I think like they're kind of in the same category as the other ones. I think at least for 2 of them, you almost think they're probably going to get there if they play the requisite more, next 4 or 5 seasons, like Stanton.
Yes. Well, Stanton, can he stay healthy enough to play? I don't know.
He might be a guy that doesn't make it, but we're all like, if he had ever just been healthy for those seasons.
There are a lot of guys like 11 years he's somehow played, but it doesn't feel like it.
I think this is a guy where if he'd been able to play his entire career against the Mets, he would be a Hall of Famer for sure.
Chipper Jones Jr.?
Yeah, no, I think unfortunately Freddie Freeman just isn't going to get there, even though he's a really good player.
Well, he's young still, though. He's only like 31,
but the he's in his career right now. He's at 227 homers and hit 288. He's not going to be able to put together enough seasons from this point out to change those stats enough where he's going to be able to beat guys out above him that we already talked about on this list that we weren't sure we're going to get in.
You're right. And actually, now that you say it, because I kind of feel like Freeman, maybe because he just kills my team all the time.
That's what it is. That's what I'm telling you, is that to us, he's a Hall of Fame level player because when he plays the Mets, he is a Hall of Fame
But he's so far from being Albert Pujols, if you want to say that at that position.
He's far from being Joey Votto.
Yeah, wow. That's
over his career,
kind of harsh. I don't know. I don't want him to get mad at us.
No, and I'm not saying that he isn't the player that Votto is, but it's just the difference between Freddie Freeman being an elite baseball player and Joey Votto being a Hall of Fame baseball player.
And he has only 1 Gold Glove, does Freddie Freeman. And who's winning all the Gold Gloves at first base in the National League?
Ooh, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's Votto.
Yes.
Then I think this is one you put on here.
Yeah, just to get your dander up a little bit.
Yeah, DJ LeMahieu.
So I put DJ in there because the first thing I noticed is that he might be the only player ever to raise his average after leaving Colorado, which is amazing. His 2 seasons after leaving the Rockies, he has raised his batting average. How many times has that happened? Mm-hmm. His last couple of years has been really, really good.
He might be the kind of guy that just turns it on a little too late into his career.
You're probably right. He does play a middle infield position, so I think if he could have 5 excellent years and average 20 home runs a season and hit 320, you might be talking about him differently. Then that may not happen, obviously, but his recent run makes him think, gee, who would even think of him in that category? So I just threw him in there.
And so I think with this last guy, I haven't sprung this on you yet, but I think this is a good idea. So for the last guy, because I think this last guy we're going to talk about here is probably the person that most embodies the idea that the idea of what makes up a Hall of Famer has changed, because you can put up the kind of statistics that used to make you essentially a lock-in for a Hall of Fame, and you can't really do that anymore. So I think this last guy, it's really interesting, is to me, he's really kind of like a lightning rod in terms of the polarization on this issue. Nelson Cruz.
Yeah.
Because if you look at his career numbers, I mean, he's almost a 280 career hitter, 278. He's hit 405 home runs.
Right, with the batting average of 280. So that's really good.
Career OPS of 133.
That's very good.
You don't do that by accident. Now, he's only got 38 WAR in 16 seasons, so that puts him below what he would need.
And I think we're all talking about Nelson Cruz because at age 40 or something,
he's definitely up there.
He is having his best seasons. He's had a few amazing seasons. Last year was amazing. His start this year has been incredible. And so that he's in the top of your mind because he's hitting home runs and hitting for average in a way that he hadn't done prior earlier in his career, because you don't hit 278 for your career unless you had some seasons that were, much below that.
So, after this episode up, we're going to post a poll on Twitter asking you guys if you think Nelson Cruz should be on.
Well, that's a good idea. Yeah,
because to me, I think he embodies the idea of whether or not compilers should be in the Hall of Fame, because to me, he's probably one of the more elite examples of a compiler type guy.
And he's principally a DH at this point in his career, which to me does not help him.
No, but he has played the field.
They do put him out there sometimes in the field,
so
even now.
Even now. So he's not a guy that is only DH.
But he's no Edgar Martinez.
No, but I think it's interesting. To me, if a rejection of Nelson Cruz is a rejection of the idea of compilers.
I like Nelly Cruz as a player.
And I like Nelly Cruz too. I would love to have him on the Mets.
But I don't think he's going to get there.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.